Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Those who are joining on Facebook, you could leave your comments in the chat section. So today, my name is Pendo Manjale, and I am a data scientist working in the financial services sector. And so I'm very excited about today's session, being close to the industry. I am also one of the co-leads for the Zambia in AI community, along with Joseph and Yasin. Our main goal as a community is to strengthen machine learning in Zambia, which we achieve by collaborating with organizations such as the Deep Learning Indaba, Zindi, and ensuring that our goals are aligned. In the past, we have hosted events such as the Deep Learning ex-Indaba Zambia at Unza and Nipa, and we have had some of our members attend the Deep Learning Indaba. And over the years, we've actually seen the number of participants increase from only one person participating in 2017 to 5 participating last year in Ghana. And we are hoping to see more this year in Senegal. So as part of our objective as a community, we also host experts in various domains who leverage AI to share knowledge. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Alex Goff, who is the CTO and co-founder of Vula. Vula is an AI-powered funding agent and the next-gen infrastructure for SME funding. I will allow Alex to share more about Vula, but I'm really looking forward to hear more and also just getting to hear to learn more on how Vula is empowering African startups and also leveraging AI to achieve that goal. So without further ado, I will invite Alex to introduce himself and also get into his presentation. I think we already received an overwhelming number of questions during the registration. And so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat sections as we proceed with the presentation. I will hand over to Alex.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so just to reiterate basically what Pendo's saying there, I love AI communities. I love data science communities. We as Vula want to be doing more of these events. We love supporting these events. And, you know, from my background personally, I've benefited a lot from joining these kind of events. So really nice to be involved. And I couldn't recommend them more for really anyone in the industry. That's kind of my motivation to come and say hello today. I will say there's kind of a task greater that you guys can judge me on at the end of this talk. But basically, I want to excite as many of you as possible to come and reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, whatever the case may be, but to give me a message and say hello. Really what the stage that we're in at this point in time means that I can have those kind of one-to-one conversations and meet more people that are in this space. And that's extremely exciting to me. So that's my challenge, to make you guys as interested in what we're doing at Vula, that you'll reach out and message me. So let's see how this goes. My talk today is about how AI can close the SME funding gap. This is something that I think is critical, and hence why I'm devoting my career and starting a business for this. Previously, I worked at IBM and dunnhumby, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But IBM, I was basically a consultant for IBM Watson. That was their AI tool in 2016. And I worked there deploying AI into different banks across the UK. And then I worked for a company called dunnhumby. Now, they are the creators of essentially retail data science. If you're in a supermarket and you're wondering why the product's kind of quite good here, typically that is because there's been a huge amount of data science to decide what should go on which shelves in which supermarkets, what pricing is best. And all of that is done from looking at retail transactions. And that's basically what I was working on. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. But let's get into it. I want to start today by basically talking about the AI world that we live in. So if you have a baby and your toddler is crying, there's an AI tool that can listen to that cry and decipher exactly what the baby is crying for. There's a toothbrush which will teach you and tutor you in how to brush your teeth better. Again, powered by AI. You've seen all of these pictures of AI robots helping in the kitchen to make your breakfast for you. And further than that, you may be late and need to apologize to the boss. So there's an excuse generator powered by AI. If you really need to have the largest excuse ever, you can move to the Korean app for the Bible and to get AI suggestions on how to repent. All of these are playful examples, basically, of the state of the world right now with the AI tools we have at hand. There is a huge variety of bizarre applications which promise you everything to repenting and going to heaven. Now, I'm here basically as a practitioner in the wild, trying to keep you away from the hype and instead focus on what's actually changed. What fundamentally has changed in the last basically 3 years that now enables a new wave of optimism about how the world will be. And I worked really hard at trying to define this in a sentence. So I think this is the best show that I can create. Essentially, I believe that simple human actions can be programmed now. Now, what I mean by that is that the common sense, the expectations that you would have when you send something to another human being, a friend, a colleague, for them to be able to review it and respond. A very simple version of that is now super attainable via simple APIs and simple prompting. Now, it is a large step. It's not necessarily the large step to AGI intelligence in AI. It's not a large step in terms of data science methods to be able to pull out, but it's a interesting insight, an interesting view of how we can better enable tools to work if we can start treating interactions with our code as if we are speaking to another human being. And that is in itself really what is opening this huge opportunity, and why generative AI, why LLMs, and more generally, why the whole sector is becoming really excited by the possibility of using this new development, this kind of simple AI consciousness. The value of this is bizarre. The expectations from McKinsey is that the amount added to the global economy will be somewhere between the GDP of China and the GDP of the USA. That's, in other words, it's like saying a new USA is coming from outer space and landing onto the world and will start trading with the world. That's the volume in which people are talking about these tools. So there is a huge seismic change that's coming, but that will only be enabled by people like you and I that understand AI, that understand data science, and understand how to implement that into a business, into a world that needs that change. So my background here, I touched on it earlier. The photo at the top here is IBM Watson. IBM Watson came out, I think it was in 2015. In 2016, I believe it then won the American quiz show called Jeopardy. It caused a huge storm, but what that tool was actually doing is taking prompts, questions from the talk show, being able to then process those prompts to extract data from a database that it had locally. It wasn't connected to the internet. It had local files, encyclopedias that it was processing, and then regurgitate that information in a sentence. And that technology was important in 2015 and became the bedrock of my career at IBM, where I was moving into different banks in the UK and using that capability to save on processing time. And one particular very powerful project that we ran basically meant that if you were a call center and a phone call came into you, instead of panicking and having to go through 100 different paper and digital documents to try and answer the customer's request, instead you had a chatbot on the side that you were able to ask questions to. Now, the change is subtle, but the empowerment as a call center agent to be able to answer a question in a split second is immeasurable. And what you found is that human-to-human contact is a really powerful thing. And when powered by AI, you ensure that the process is always correct, the wording is always correct, and that the operational time is much less. So you essentially make the human call center agent super powered. That is in effect what we're trying to do with Vula on both the SMEs, the startups, the businesses that are trying to grow, and for the SME funders. So if I move to this, African countries are adding more people to the workforce in the next 10 years than the rest of the world combined. Where are the jobs coming from? Now, this is a big part of the reason why Nick, my CEO, and I founded this business. There is a seismic change happening. And I want to mention that today. I feel it would be remiss if I didn't. It's essentially the foundation for why we started Vula and why we need automation and AI in SME funding. Here's how we do it. We help SMEs and we help SME funders. So at its simplest, we are training AI to help SMEs find and then apply, draft, and win SME funding. And on the SME funder side, we're making sure that they can actually process those new SMEs that are applying to them better than they've ever seen applications before. This is ultimately because we are looking to serve a sector that has been ignored. Meet Joyce. She's a great example, someone we've actually met, different name. She is happy to pay huge APRs on 100K loans because she knows that she can earn that back. She knows the profit margins that she's going to make from a purchase order that she's had. But she's had to turn those purchase orders down because she has not got access to buy the raw materials, to buy the new machine that will allow her to process that in time. There are 2 million businesses, formal businesses across Africa that do this, that have this problem, that only need $330 billion to actually service what they believe they need to service. It's a huge unmet funding demand. And as such, it's a huge opportunity because if you are taking large percentages off the amount that you're loaning, you essentially have around, we believe, $30 billion in which you could earn. So we're stood here saying there's $30 billion that people could be earning. Why are they not doing this? Where is everybody? There's enough SMEs. Where are the funders? There is a problem with access for capital, and that's what we're trying to fix. The cost to serve is ultimately the problem here. The reason that SME funders aren't loaning is that their cost to serve is way too high for them to believe that they will make a return on the money that they lend. And that's really because of 2 things. There's a risk element, a risk that they will not get that money back, and an overheads element, that it costs them so much to run those loans that even if they do make money back, it's not enough for them to cover how much they've spent in operating. So we do 2 things. We focus on risk. Non-performing loans, NPLs, are too high right now. Across Africa, it's about 11% of loans become non-performing. That means that they struggle to pay back, they take longer times, or they don't pay back at all in the end. That across SME economies that are more advanced, typically about 2. So the risk factor is around 5.5%, 5.5 times greater. And that is a contributing factor. But what can we do about that? Often cited is that there is not enough data. And you can see the data science element coming into this now. If people are saying there's not enough data, then how can we do better? Currently, SME funders usually go to different data sources, public agencies, third parties, and the SMEs themselves, more often than not, the SMEs themselves. But the way that they ask for data is a problem. It is download this, print it out, fill it in by hand, give me a call and we'll work it out. Ultimately, the experience is so painful that the due care and attention doesn't happen. I'm sure if any of you are entrepreneurs in this call, you've had this experience again and again. It is painful, expensive, and wasteful when you're trying to raise money that you end up hating the process and giving up often. It is often said to us from SME funders that they make their applications hard, so then only the people that really need it will apply. Now, we hear that, we can understand that, But we believe it's the wrong mindset to have when you're trying to grow. It's the wrong mindset because you could flip that mindset and say, if we had an infinite number of first touch relationship managers, what could we do? Now, nomenclature here, first touch relationship managers are essentially the people that would be in the bank's front house, welcome in the SMEs, help them fill in the forms. That generally is viewed as a fantastic service to have and a good way for the business, the lender, to learn more about that person, about that business. Now, we turn it on its head and say, what if it was an infinite number? What if you could use AI and data science to assist in the number of applications that you're going to get? Imagine this flow. We're not there yet, but this is an idealized position that we want to get to. You get a WhatsApp from Vula saying there's 3 purchase order finance options that are available. It knows that you want purchase order finance, and it knows enough about your company to be able to go sure that you are eligible. So you get options that you're eligible for that are ready to go. And it means that you've just sped up all of that wasted time, typically done in search, typically done in trying to understand how to answer the questions, and typically done in actually writing. So you get those 3 options and you go and click on one and you go through the process. There's an apply with Vula button, which means that in one click, you'll be able to then go and apply. Type in your name, your company URL, what your director's called, what your problem statement is, what your solution is. No more of that. Just one click apply. Vula comes in and starts drafting the answers for you. It knows what your business does, so it knows how to answer these questions. But more than that, it knows what you're applying for as well, and knows what it should be focusing on. Have a look, and if you accept, the money could be in your account in the next 24 hours. And you can go and see those terms inside of Vula. It's an idealized case, but it is where we want to be going. So that's a risk element, making sure that the data is better by incentivizing every business owner by making their process easier. So we believe we can reduce risk. But the dirty secret is, even if we can increase and make better data, there's still a problem with overheads. Does it solve everything to have huge amounts of data that's high quality? In the SME ecosystem right now, across Africa, no. We need to look at overheads. And by overheads, I mean, we need to remove the cost it takes to review an application, make a decision, and then operate that loan. Now, this is a very specific case, and I apologize if this is too specific, but 20 to 40% of time of an analyst reviewing a loan application is usually wasted just trying to get the documents. It's phoning up the SME and saying, hey, I just saw that this document is actually a year out of date. Could you upload a new one? Or I can't actually read this document. It's too blurry. The photo that you've taken, it's too blurry. Or even worse, this document isn't the correct document. You should have uploaded a different one. This back and forth is a huge waste of time for a lot of analysts. We try to reduce those overheads by reducing the manual work, making sure that SMEs are more engaged, and reducing the time it takes to apply. So how do we do that? Well, one of our data science methods is really focused on document analysis. Instead of loading and waiting for the analyst to check it to see if it's right, we know that we have data science methods that can already check to see, is this document readable? Is this document actually of the type? And is this document going to be possible to be analyzed? So we give notification back to users when they're uploading documents to say, hey, this probably won't be accepted. Please upload a different one. The better thing is, once they've uploaded one good one, we never need to ask for that document again. We have that document stored in Vula and Vula will pre-draft that application and spot that you've asked for a balance sheet from this year. Well, I already have one of those balance sheets, and we'll attach it to that application. We're trying to reduce and incentivize SMEs to give good data first time. That saves the analyst time. But we can go a step further now. We have these documents stored in state. So why aren't we pre-processing them? An analyst, typically in a balance sheet scenario, would go through and try to find what are the core metrics, and then need to multiply all of those metrics to calculate ratios, and then return and report on those ratios. What we have Vula do instead is analyze the balance sheets, pull out the key metrics, and then put those into a method which calculates the ratios. It means what could take an analyst 4 hours takes Vula a fraction of a second, literally a quarter of a second. And in that time, it tries to find out and display that back to the analyst. And the analyst comes on, they can see the document, and then they can check the numbers. If the numbers are wrong, they can modify the numbers and immediately update their ratios. This is what we look at in terms of process improvement. We've been talking about LLMs and having AI assistants, but this is a functional example of what an AI assistant could do in 2024. And the importance of that is the reduction in cost to serve, meaning that they can give out loans more quickly, meaning that they can give more loans, and meaning that they can take slightly more risk. We also look at this as data retention. Every time you interact with a different business, you make a decision in a loan context. But that knowledge is useful if you ever see a similar company in the future. So another thing that we give SME funders is the ability to talk to their history of all of their applications. So you can say, have we invested in a similar company before? And it will be able to return back information about similar companies that may be in the same vertical or maybe asking for a similar loan amount, be able to give you history of what your organization has done in order to make a case for investing in this company in the future or not investing in the company in the future. Currently, the best equivalent that we have to this is to be able to speak to someone that has been working in the business for years and saying, hey, do you understand in this scenario any health institutions that we've invested in the past? We can now do that and embed that inside of Vula to save SME funders huge amounts of time in preparing cases. Again, the focus here is to reduce the manual work, to make SMEs more engaged, and really reduce the time cost. Quick turnaround, better customer experience, less overheads. That's what we're aiming for when we're looking at reducing risk and when we're looking at reducing overheads. So that's our Vula platform. That's where we're getting to. But there's a step better here. One of the things I haven't mentioned is basically what is available right now on Vula. If you're an entrepreneur, you can right now sign up to Vula at vula.vc, be able to put in your website and use that as training material for an AI. Vula will then come back and say, is this correct? Do I understand your business properly? Here's an elevator pitch. And after you've done those 2 steps, it can then go and find all of the grants on the internet that it's been scraping for every single day and be able to then say you and your business match directly to these grants. Now, that is the first step in terms of life cycle funding, typically for a business. There's usually some sort of injection of cash for the business to grow. It can then move into educational focus, into grants, then maybe equity is suitable. And after that, maybe loans are more suitable. But there is a life cycle of funding. And when you jump from each stage, you typically don't have good evidence of the previous stages. It is very useful when analyzing a loan to see if you've taken a grant before, or if you've previously had a loan at a smaller ticket size. All of this is what Vula is trying to bring in, life cycle funding, so that everyone can make better decisions for SMEs. And SMEs don't have to explain their story 100 times to 100 different people. So what can AI do and what can't AI do? It can't solve the user experience. That's something that we as humans need to sort out. How can the process be better for every single person within inside of it? AI can't generate useful data without having any reference to anything. There is no value in having an AI generate an elevator pitch if it doesn't know what your company does. And it can't really make decisions for you, or at least we don't believe it should be. The way that SMEs should decide which loan they want to go for, which grant they want to go for, should be up to them. But it should be reducing your time. So if we flip this, it can support users with better data submission, making the experience better by reference, but not directly. It should be able to structure and synthesize data from multiple sources, but it's not making up data. And it should be able to reduce and make decisions easier, but it can't make decisions for you. There is a 300 billion funding gap. There's 9 million new workers every year being added to the workforce across Africa. There's a huge amount of money to be made. And we see a path where AI reduces risk, reduces overhead, reduces cost to serve, and ultimately becomes the solution for accelerating the SME ecosystem. Now, I will take a pause. I know I get quite excited about this, and this next section I'll get even more excited about. But I want to go into an economic theory with you guys. I think the audience is appropriate for this. You know, we're all data scientists here. We love trying to understand in between the murkiness, what is the pattern of things that is going on? And economics gets a bad rap sometimes. It's often what economics is trying to do, just at a much, much different scale. I'm going to talk to you about what I think is possibly the most important economic theory that will change the next 50 and 100 years. And that theory is called demographic dividends. It's the idea that we as humans change much more slowly than what our environment does. And it specifically focuses on births and death. So I will go through this more slowly and not try to rush myself. Feel free to message me after this. I'm thinking of my goals again. Message me and say you want a conversation. You don't quite understand it. That's fine. I want to explain it. I think it is critical to understand. But what it is that usually, and almost every economy has gone through this, there are points where the average birth rate is very high. Typically, an average woman would have 7 children. And throughout their life, 2 of them would typically get to maturity, maybe 3. Then there is a change. There is a change in social structure. There's a change in economics. There is a change in how society is coming together to make sure that it focuses on health and education. And all of these things actually reduce infant mortality, meaning that those 7 children are more than likely to survive up until adulthood, to be, you know, those 2 that would survive, now 7 survive. And it's a huge change. But culturally, typically families don't initially get smaller. For the generation and maybe the generation after the change has started to happen, you typically still see large families. And this ultimately gives a massive population boom. That's what this blue line is meant to show here. You suddenly have the death rate dropping, and our culture really doesn't change that much. You still have a large number of kids in each family. Now, as the generations change, you know, over 20, 30, 40 years, population decisions change, and we tend to go back to having 2 children per mother. But it takes time. And in that time, a huge number of people are born, a huge number of people survive, and they all age. They go to school perhaps, and then they go into the workforce. And you get a dividend from them being young and working through their population boom. Suddenly, there are more people working than were working in previous generations, in previous years, as a proportion of that society. And different countries go through this at different times. So you can see different country names here. Uganda, Zambia in this case. It's probably an old graph if I'm honest with you. But around this point, those demographics are starting to change. Now, the reason why that's important is this bulge of people which are suddenly working. So this is the percentage of working age for China and Japan. So in the 90s, the working percentage, 70%. And what that ultimately means is 70% of people are paying tax typically. And then in China, you could see it's even slightly higher, probably 73-ish%. But a huge proportion of the population are actually working and paying tax because of it, meaning that there is a dividend, there is a huge abundance of money that is going into that economy. But then, as they age, you get the opposite effect. And suddenly, all of those people, that population boom that you had, is starting to go into retirement and old age. And we're going to be seeing this across China in the next 10 years, as more and more of their population are focusing on retirement and not working anymore. Their economy will slow down. And this has happened across a huge number of countries, across Europe, across the Americas, and across Southeast Asia. If we go to this next chart, 1 in 10 people are over 80 years old in Japan. That's a bizarre fact to me. And in fact, their population has almost flipped the other way, where almost 1 in 3 are of retirement age, meaning that only about 60% of people are younger than 65. And then you take away from that the number of people that are still in education, so still not earning. And you have a small number of people that are basically paying tax to run society, are running the economy and earning and growing. So you have a demographic change as they grow. Now, why am I talking about this? Why is it important? It's crucially important because Africa, yes, is the next frontier. People have been talking about that for a long time. But it's crucially important because we need to be making changes to ensure that all of the new people, that big population boom, are actually going to be in good, productive work. And that is part of education, that's part of government, but that's part, and why we focus on it, the SME economy. The SME economy is desperately needed because typically in most countries, 60 to 80% of all jobs don't come from huge corporates, they come from SMEs, they come from local businesses. And that's what the mission of Vula is, to develop. So an SME economy, education and skills, a stable government, they're all important, but the SME ecosystem is the thing that fixes all the rest. Because if you have an SME ecosystem, you have a huge number of people in work, they're becoming educated from that, they're earning skills from that, and they're typically paying tax, which then demands the government to be more stable. Now, we can talk about governments. I imagine we're all data scientists and we'd rather not. Joyce is waiting. There is an imperative for us to take action right now to make sure that SME economies work properly. And that's why we're here with our AI and data science tools. Now, I promised to talk about AI and finance. This is how I would like to phrase the question. What do we not like doing right now? Caveat, that doesn't introduce bias. There was a few questions beforehand about bias in AI algorithms and what we do with that. And that's why this caveat is really important. What do we not like doing that isn't a subjective thing that we do? And that actually makes our job a lot easier when we're thinking of how we can implement these tools. Going back to this balance sheet analysis, it's very easy without using bias or having any implication of that to think, yeah, we hate looking at balance sheets. We hate the time it wastes. We hate checking if this document is correct. It's got nothing to do with bias. It is a factual element. And hence, it's a perfect use case for using AI and data science. That's why we came up with the balance sheet analysis. Similarly, oh yes, I wanted to explain a bit how this works, right? We use OCR, optical character recognition. That's putting it through a process to then draw out all of the text. And be it an image or be it a digital document, you need to pull out the characters from the document. That's why we do optical character recognition. We then have an LLM function that is pulling from these new digital characters the actual base figures. And it's looking at the text coming out of them. It's been trained on previous work, and it knows, there's the word inventory here, and the next perhaps adjacent number, or the next time that it's discussed, it is then referenced to this number. That base figure extraction would be very complicated to do with normal methods, but it's a nice, simple human action that we can rely on and hence use LLMs for. And then finally, a more hardcore, typical simple data science calculation to then use the outputs from the AI that is then structured to then calculate ratios. So that's an overview basically of how this tool works. It's optical characterization of this image. It's then an LLM pulling out these core values. And then it's a simple data calculation to then produce the ratios. But you then have that data that you can use elsewhere in your process flow. One of the things that enables is human beings to help one another. Their time is no longer wasted looking at documents. Instead, now we can think of a bank using this tool, or a funder of any type using this tool, as a series of mentors that are meant to help SMEs grow, not meant to look through their documents and check those numbers. That's the ethos that we have behind this. Remove the stuff we don't like doing to help people do the stuff they do like doing. Let's use this again. What do we not like doing that doesn't introduce bias? My computer sometimes looks like this. A million different tabs as I've been searching for different grants for our companies. It's a huge pain. It's got nothing to do with bias. Simply all I have in my head is what my company that I'm looking for is, and then all of the different websites that I'm looking for that I know will talk about grants, the different Google search terms that will show grants. Instead, we flip this on its head. Vula can send you an email to say that you've matched with a particular grant that it's seen. Just click on this link to have a look. How does this work? So we have a Python scraper that every day is essentially looking for different grants on the web, checking who those grants are eligible for, pulling out the eligibility criteria, pulling out what the program's for, pulling out what the amount of money that is being issued is. And then we take that through an extraction, an LLM extraction. What I mean by that is we send the full page of the website to the LLM for it to pull out and make sure that it understands what that is, to then be able to write what we would want to the companies that are applicable. We then have a human review step here, and we talk about this later. It's a critical thing when you're dealing with LLMs. You need to have some human reviews at really critical junctions to make sure that you are being consistent in how you want your company, your brand, how you interact. You don't want to be open to huge variation. You don't want a website to say certain phrasings which doesn't fit with how you would talk about them. So you need to have a human review. But then the next step is to do a company matching algorithm. And we use a technique called cosine similarity that works on top of embeddings. And I want to talk a bit more about that. So embeddings is an interesting technology, and I apologize if you know them already, but they are typically underreported. Yet I can't understand why, because they're incredibly powerful as well. I'm going to just do a quick explanation of embeddings, focused only in a 2D paradigm, not in the typical 1500 parameters dimensions. We just have a 2D grid here of things that are dry and wet and of things that are blue and red. Bear with me, I know this sounds odd, but you'll get this. So up here in the dry and red column on number value of 1 and 1, we have the most dry and the most red things that I could think of, which are dried chilies. Down here in red and wet, we have wine. So the score, the number that we give is -1 and 1 and -1. Blue and wet things, I think of water. So -1 and -1. And jeans, -1 and 1. They're typically dry and they are blue. We've now embedded knowledge into a 2D grid system. If I gave you the coordinates of something, you would be able to place it here and see if you agree with my embedding system. If I came up with different items, we could place them here somewhere. You know, if we had an apple, it's red, but I don't know if I'd describe it as wet or dry. So maybe it's a 1, 0. We can start using this embedding system to embed knowledge into a vector. This embedding is what powers LLMs currently. Any text that you write is split into tokens, is split then into embeddings. And those embeddings are the maths, the numbers that we're giving to the LLM. And the LLM is then looking at those and predicting what it thinks the next word should be because it knows what those numbers are. So embeddings power LLMs, but you don't just have to use LLMs. You can use embeddings too. There is an API with OpenAI. There's plenty different modules. You can look at them on Hugging Face. But I'm using OpenAI because it's an easy one to use. I'm just using my Postman client here, and I'm typing in the words dried chili peppers and blood. Don't know what I put. Wine, that should be, and getting a number coming out of them. So this is the embeddings of OpenAI's embedding engine. And you can see that there's 1,500 different dimensions that OpenAI has trained on. So we had 2, whether it was wet or whether it was red. OpenAI has 1,500, and we don't know what those axes are. We don't know if it's red or blue. We don't know if it's wet or dry. We don't know. That's a whole region of explainable AI that's trying to work out what those things are. We just have a number. But we can then use cosine similarity to compare those 2 vectors. Now, if I compare a chili pepper to a chili pepper, nothing has changed. Cosine similarity gives me a score of 1. They are the same. If I compare chili peppers to wine, I get a score of 0.78. Now, the numbers here, as you can see, are all very similar. 0.78, 0.76, 0.77. But there are going to be points where 2 things are very, very similar and have some sort of contextual link. So we have water and wine being very, very closely linked. Now, you can see why I picked those examples. Turning water to wine is an often spoken about part of the Bible. There is a strong relationship between those 2 items, stronger than any relationship between any of the other items. And as a result, when we do the embedded matchings, when we do cosine similarity, we can see that embedding. We can see there is a relationship between those 2 things stronger than there is of any others. Why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about this method? Well, this is a real factor in how we at Vula do grant matching, how we know that this company is actually aligned to this grant. There is a brilliant game called Contexto.me that will help you get an idea more of embeddings. What it does is it allows you to type any word into it, and it will tell you how many words away you are from the item it is thinking of. It's kind of like 20 questions. And you start typing in these words, and you get closer and closer to the word it's thinking of. So in this case, I've typed airport, plane, fly, taxi, takeoff, started with nose and submarine and building. But I know that I've been getting closer and closer. Now, the score here is the index, the order in which I'm close to the word. So I am 3 words away from the word that it is thinking of. Why am I talking about this? because it is using embedded matching. It orders all of the words it knows and tells you how close you are. And you can start to see that none of these words are similar in terms of how they're spelt, but they are similar in terms of what they mean. And that is exactly what embeddings try to do. They take words and show how the meaning of those words are able to be matched. So in this case, airport, plane, fly, taxi, takeoff, the correct word, the leading word was flight. And I did get there eventually, but it did take me a long time. And this is the interesting thing when you're playing with embeddings. There is a context, but you don't know what it is. Now, obviously, we've spoken about quite a lot here. I am a huge optimist with what we can do, but it isn't all good news. And there are plenty of things that I'm worried about. But I want to start first by saying nothing is ever good news. The discovery of the steam engine was not good news for everything. I don't see technology ever being a good or bad technology. It's simply just an advancement. And where we take it is the difference. Now, this is really important because we, the people in this room, the people listening to this, are the ones that ultimately decide what gets built and how well it gets built. We need to be sure that we believe this is going in the right direction. And when I'm thinking of the SME funding gap, when I'm thinking of the demographic dividends and the number of people that we need to employ, get into the workforce, make sure that they can build their businesses, I don't see anything more important right now to focus on and apply these tools that can save a huge amount of money and make a huge impact. So my point when we talk about things that are scary is that nothing is ever good. Nothing is ever bad. When we talk about tech advancement, it's just how it's built. And we need to make sure that those methods are being applied in the right positions. And the simplest way we can do that is with our work. Now, I do have worries. My worries are about insider trading. My worries are about insider trading in the sense that it is going to be very easy for these AI systems to read the web and perhaps learn information from the web that isn't widely known and be able to transmit those to different AIs that also would use that information to commit insider trading. I do have concerns about that. More than that, about market manipulation. If we have all of these AI tools doing all of this analysis and quickly something starts coming in the news that makes stock performance poor or government performance poor or attacks individuals, that market manipulation is going to be so strong and so hard to understand. And this is all about spotting and understanding when things are generated and not. And I don't see a clear and obvious way that these AI tools are going to have that right now. Phishing scams are the same. It'll be very hard soon to understand whether something's been written by a human being or written by a bot, unless it says delve, as some of you may have heard, apparently. The craziness of that is that phishing scams or phishing scams can become really, really detailed and targeted about you, about your company, about what you're doing. And then finally, political instability. If we can no longer trust those things, political instability sounds scary. And there's been a few instances in the UK alone where different politicians have been kind of mocked, even though the actual truth of it was false. So yes, I do have worries. I'm not a blind optimist, but in the sense of what we can do, I believe there is a huge amount to do. And I believe that we are in the right position to do this, and the time is now with a generation that is going to change this. So to cap this off, basically, I want to give an idea of, I've spoken about Vula, about what we're trying to do, about all of the science that we're trying to apply. I want to talk about where we are currently. So Vula right now is a team size of 2. We have a few people helping us out, but ultimately it's just myself and Nick. We've been working with 3 different clients currently, huge number more in terms of interest and POCs, but we are just a team size of 2. But hopefully by June, we're going to have closed our first large funding round. We'll be closing our seed round. And at that point, we know that we need to scale in team size dramatically quickly. And we know really from our own projections where we're going to be in a year and a half's time. The reason I'm saying this is to say we aren't hiring yet, but I do want to say hello. If you're an SME funder, obviously I want to say hello, but to anyone on this call, hopefully I've been interesting enough that you have been interested to reach out. And my goal at the beginning of this talk is going to succeed, and you will say hello, and we'll get onto a call and say hello in person. So that is the end of my talk. Pendo, I'll leave it over to you, and we can go through a Q&A or anything that happens next. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. This has been very insightful, and I like how you brought out the aspect of some of the challenges that you foresee ahead of the development of AI in finance, such as the phishing scams and also things like political instability. I think while AI is extremely beneficial, I think it's also important to take those the concerns around the harms as well in mind as we develop these products with AI. So thank you so much, Alex. This has been very insightful. Just quickly, we did have a few questions in the registration that I will just maybe go over with you, and maybe perhaps if the audience has any questions for Alex, we could take those questions as well. But I will just start with the first question for you, Alex. What are the measures in place to mitigate the potential biases in AI algorithms, especially concerning factors like region, industry, and company size?
Yeah, perfect. Honestly, there is a huge industry of explainable AI that's working on this. And the way that I imagine this changing in the future is that almost every single product that uses AI will be connected to some sort of explainable AI service that will be reviewing changes to models, will be reviewing outputs and inputs to make sure that there is some culpability and some visibility where these algorithms are going wrong. But right now, I think in place of those tools not being fully developed yet, it really comes down to the creators of these products, including myself here. As a CTO, this is something that I have to be thinking about. And the way that I think about it is kind of how I demonstrated earlier. What are the things that we hate to do that are not based off bias? So that is my method, my rule currently, to make sure that AI aren't kind of unduly essentially misassessing how people should be assessed. There's an interesting story before about Google's internal AI engine that was checking CVs to do the first pass in terms of taking people into the interview process. And when they did their own internal explainable AI stuff, they found that it usually would powerfully reduce the scores of certain universities that people had gone to. Now, some people would say, yeah, that makes sense. If you have someone that's coming from a really prestigious university, they should be higher up your prioritization. But what they actually found is it was actually focusing. It was really reducing the score from schools and universities that were perhaps fully female. There was a big female college in the US that it was actually discriminating against. And we can't have those systems kind of invisibly do that anymore. We need to have explainable AI. So there is a lot of work in that field. The example I just gave there of Google's kind of explainable AI adventures, that happened, I think, almost 3 or 4 years ago now. So there has been progress, but keeping up with the LLM progress that we have right now is going to be hard. So it comes down to the decisions we make as engineers about where we use AI and how we use AI. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think you did actually speak about, you already answered the question, but I think it was important to just get more measures that are being mitigated.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Okay, so I know you've answered the next question. You've already mentioned that you're not hiring yet, but let's talk. So the other question is, how can I partner with you to service the Zambian market? Maybe perhaps for this question, the individual can reach out to you directly.
Yeah, that works perfectly. I'll say more generally than that as well. You know, we have Vula.vc, the website, for anyone that's running a business to be able to go on there, train Vula to then go and find you grants. And we are really in a sprint trying to work and improve that much more. So be gentle with our MVP. But more than that, if you are in the finance sector, we strongly, Zambia is one of our 6 geographies that we're focusing on, and yeah, anything we can do to help a financial lender or an SME funder more generally, grants, DFIs, NBFIs, banks, anything that we can do to have those conversations. We have a really strong mission. I spoke about demographic dividends earlier. We have a really strong mission to make sure that the SME ecosystem exists and is growing as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we see a huge failure in terms of how we have helped the over 1 billion people that are going to be born. So, yeah, if you're in either of these sectors, we're more than happy to have a chat, talk things through. I'm not thinking of it in terms of sales. I'm thinking of it purely in terms of what can we do to be better. And yeah, my email address is around. Pendo, if anyone comes to you, please send them to me. And yeah.
Sure. I will also share your LinkedIn
Brilliant.
link.
Thank you very much.
So another question that's here is what are some of the supporting infrastructure options for AI models in the fintech industry?
Oof, the hard questions, huh? Ultimately, it's quite hard. There is a huge number of tools. I mean, we look at the LLM positions, right? There are a huge number of APIs that are easy to access, but they are very general, and they are very good. You know, we can't understate that, and we all know that personally. You know, I'm regularly using Claude and ChatGPT, but when you're looking in a more defined, more specific business cost, it can be challenging. So this is where we talk about what can you do without hyper detailed models. So, you know, the balance sheet extraction that I'm talking about, we're separating out each of those stages. So we don't just chuck a PDF document at an LLM and say, hey, give me the ratios. We actually separate the individual actions so they can be more strictly defined, more simple. And you can do a lot of good without those hyper detailed models and the infrastructure that's underneath them. Shot learning is really good, you know, 1, 2, 3, or however many shots that you believe you need to get standard data. GPT has, you know, OpenAI really worked on GPT functions, a way of querying with prompts, with text, and getting it to respond in structured JSON every single time. Those are really good tools, good infrastructure for that. When we're thinking then more custom detailed models, that's then when we're starting to look at different services, different infrastructure options. And I'm not going to suggest any that are unusual. You know, a lot of building a business isn't to use unusual infrastructure, it's to use the things that you know. And we use a lot of Python, we use a lot of Jupyter notebooks. When we're actually talking, you know, infrastructure as a service, you know, we use AWS, we use Azure for different services because they're better in different ways. And more than that, the way that we're building Vula cannot be LLM specific because we know different LLMs are better at different tasks. So there is a lot of infrastructure there that we can use. It's really about picking what is the process that you're trying to optimize. How can I make it small, simple steps? How can I break down those steps so they interweave? And then which services, which infrastructure is going to be the best for those different areas? And there is no simple answer to that, I'm afraid. It's always going to be a challenge and it's always going to be changing, but we have to be aware of our options and know them each time.
Yeah, and I guess also depends on how much capital you have to invest in certain infrastructure.
Oh, always the capital
Business
challenges
wise.
are hard. Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Okay, so there's another interesting question. What is your position on AI governance and the financial sector for Africa?
Another hard question. Um, it's it is challenging. Um, every every country and region is struggling with this. You know, if I'm going to be really general with this, America is building a, a huge number of tools. You know, it's really the home right now. But the government isn't functional enough to make decisions on this. And in many ways, you know, what Sam Altman is doing, for example, is trying to challenge and trying to build his own governance position with which different regions can just accept it. I'm not sure that's the way I'm comforted when I think about governance. You know, the people making it are the ones that govern themselves. Um, but there are different hubs, and you know, if I'm going to continue that analogy, like the EU and Canada, they're typically the ones that focus on regulation more. But the impact of their recent AI regulations hasn't been really clear from my point of view. Um, and it will be interesting to see what happens as these tools become more developed and whether the regulations will follow in step and be as developed as the tools are. Um, if you then look to Asia, I would say it's much less clear what their position is and how they tend to govern um, different AI developments. But I will say that typically the governments are a lot more open to kind of large structural changes. And you know, China is the obvious one that I'm thinking about here and how they can incorporate it. But then more generally, or more specifically, even looking at the Middle East, the adoption of AI is much greater in terms of their government and their governance of services. So we are in an unusual space. If you then look more strictly at Africa, I haven't seen a huge amount to really give me a lot of confidence in Africa being the lead yet on governance. Um, there's not a specific country, I think, right now that in the world, I mean more generally than just Africa, there's not a specific country I think that is nailing AI governance. And I think different ones are coming at it with different ephyses. And I think it's too nascent to be able to know which one is doing it correctly. But I think a good reference for this is data more generally. You know, in South Africa, you have Popia, or have Popia, and that I think is a really strong governance tool for data. It'd be interesting to see what the government is going to be doing in an AI position here. But you know, similar to that, the EU created GDPR, and GDPR, I personally think, is one of the most influential tools that we have now as consumers or as users more specifically to actually control our data and make good decisions. So there is always going to be a challenge with governance and it lagging. But right now, I don't see a huge, strong position in terms of AI governance in Africa. I want it to occur. I'm interested to hear new ideas. I hope it isn't closed-fisted and restricted, because again, anything that restricts these AI tools is only going to delay the amount of time it takes for an SME ecosystem to grow, and hence for the jobs to grow, and hence for the economy to grow, and hence for people's quality of living to grow. So for me, restrictive AI governance is going to be a problem. But AI governance with the same heart as what Popia and GDPR had could be really beneficial. And you know, part of the way that we think about the governance of data with Vula is that each SME owns their data. You know, they lease out the information to the SME funders for the SME to funders to produce and transact with them. But it is the SME that owns their data. And that was directly inspired from GDPR and Popia. So I think there's a lot going on. I'm not sure right now how the world more generally and how different economies will govern AI. So yeah, a really tricky question. I'm sorry we don't have a stronger answer, but we have to do the best we can as a company here, and we are fighting for SMEs here. So I think we're personally in a good position, regardless of how AI governance occurs in Africa.
I think there's really no straight answer yet. And I did read somewhere that the AU is making progress on how AI will be governed in Africa before we get down to, we even narrow down to the different countries in Africa. I think we only have about 7, if I'm not mistaken, that have AI strategies. So we do have a long way to go. But I think, like you mentioned, we look forward to changes that the governance that will not stifle the adoption of AI and also development at the same time. So yeah, we hope that comes out more strong as we even develop and see more AI models being deployed across the different sectors. Okay, so I see we are running out of time, but maybe in 5 minutes, I will just run through 2 more questions. And then I think I have shared the link to Alex's LinkedIn page, and I've also shared his email. So please do feel free to reach out to him if you have further questions. He has mentioned that he's available to answer and also share more information that he may have not shared here. So there's another question regarding cybersecurity in the financial services sector, looking at the development of AI. What is the future of cybersecurity?
Yeah, ultimately, this comes back to the challenge that every new technology is neither good nor bad. And I think what we're going to have is an arms race in cybersecurity where more and more people will be doing sophisticated phishing scams, and there will be more and more kind of AI-based cybersecurity tools that will be spotting those and essentially tranching them. I think that will be a huge frontier in terms of cybersecurity at the moment. The other side of it as well is essentially allowing bots to generate code that can dynamically attack websites, and you could imagine that happening quite easily with just what we have right now. When you look at dev tools like Devon, you can be quite scared by the idea not of it building full complex apps, but it building small code packages that are then executed immediately. So yeah, I can see that changing quite quickly. Reviewing pages, though, in terms of their security access, could become much easier when you have an AI tool that is constantly probing at pages and trying to do different attacks, but in a good sense, in a security sense. Detection tools inside of your code lines, faster acting kind of AI security tools that are looking for 0 days. All of these kind of things will be enabled for the good and for the bad with AI. So I see the future of cybersecurity being just faster and faster because of AI.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I think we will end the questions here. I have seen the other questions have been answered already during the presentation. So thank you so much, everyone that joined us. And thank you so much, Alex, for the presentation and for being available to share with the community. Alex, I have shared, I think I'll re-echo this. I have shared Alex's details in the chat and his email as well.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been a joy to speak to you all, and hope we speak again soon.